Welcome to The Call to Rise, the podcast for sacred rebels, visionaries, and conscious changemakers. Here we sit down with the people birthing the new earth, weaving ancient wisdom with modern strategy to build movements that heal, transform, and uplift our world. I'm Makenzie Darling, your host, inviting you into honest conversations, practical tools, and hard-won wisdom to awaken your power and to inspire you to answer the call to rise and to meet this moment in history. Today we are joined by Shiloh Sophia. Shiloh Sophia lives life as a great adventure narrated by the creative fire of her muse. She has dedicated her life to the belief that self-expression is a basic human right and shares her message with thousands around the world through her paintings, poetry, and teachings. She leads a global movement of revolutionary education focused on intentional creativity as offered in the Color of Women teacher training. She co-founded a studio and center for intentional creativity, MUSEA, in Sonoma, California, and most mornings she can be found having tea with her muse, poring over quantum physics, philosophy, and sacred texts in the Red Thread Cafe. Welcome, Shiloh. It is so wonderful to have you here.
Makenzie, it's always wonderful spending time with you.
Absolutely. I was just thinking to myself, it has to be about 7 or 8 years ago, we met at the Wisdom 2.0 conference, and I was walking out of a workshop and there was this beautifully colored, very similar to the way that you look today with an amazing hat and just painting this gorgeous mural. And we've been on this incredible journey ever since.
Absolutely. I recognize the kindred sister immediately. I'm so glad we've continued to weave our threads with the mutual work that we do individually and collectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I have just always been such a fan of your work. Behind you is this incredible mural. Let's start the show on this and talk a little bit about your art and what this piece means.
Thank you. Yeah, this piece is about the movement of energy. And this is a 12-month piece that I painted in community. So I'm live streaming from my studio. They're painting where they are. And this was our approach to how you create your world. And so it's layers of ideas and concepts. And this is an idea pouring through into consciousness and coming out onto the earth plane. So it's an opportunity to work with the subconscious, the unconscious, to meditate, to release energy, to express yourself. Yeah, so it's always fun. And knowing that I'm doing it with 200 other people around the world is even funner. And their painting looks nothing like mine.
Amazing. Amazing. I love that. One of the things that I was most excited to talk to you about, because I'll be bringing on different movement makers, but I think what really separates you and one of your biggest magical abilities is this connection with source, that you truly are such a channel and you teach people on how to channel from source. And I think your paintings are such a physical representation of that. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that, your connection to source, how you teach this and how that really started the movement of intentional creativity.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should start with just defining source,
Love that. Yeah, let's do that. Perfect.
At the most sort of primordial level, it's life itself lifing. It's the universe universing, it's the cosmosing, right? It's the initial spark of creation that started 13.8 billion years ago. And we are the extension of that expression. I call it the cosmic orgasm, but other people call it the Big Bang. But, we are at the, if you can imagine these stars projecting out from that moment, we are the quivering edge of that evolutionary expansion. And it hasn't actually stopped, right? It's just continued on. And so we are that. And so that's the ultimate life force. At the most basic level is life came up out of this amazing combination of chemistry, right? And somehow as a result of the different ingredients, water and microlightning and, stardust, we emerged. However, whether you think that's creator or it's just an organic life form rising out of a rock, right? Like it still came, the conditions for life we're so specific. The exact relationship of the sun to us, to the moon to us, like it's a miracle that we're here. And it's that life force I feel that I'm in ultimate relationship and respect with, is like just that it's here. And it's also graceful, because more like grace, because I don't have to do anything to get it. It just is. And so getting into that isness is part of what I do through creativity and helping people return to an awareness of that. Gosh, it's all right here, and we get to be a part of it. And that's so miraculous. And I think we sometimes miss that.
It really feels like you live your life as one big miracle. There's that famous Einstein quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's like, you either live your life like nothing's a miracle, or you live your life like everything is. And I think that that's something that you and I have very much in common, that we both live our lives as miracles. Yeah. Mm. And I love that you touched upon the flow of that, because when you're in the river of this divinity or source or life force or whatever you want to call it, which you just absolutely, I love that we're kicking off this podcast together, because I think it is so important to define source, and you did that so beautifully. But can you talk a little bit more about that relationship to flow and force? Because I think, when we're talking about building movements, a lot of times we're so much in our masculine energy. And so would love to dive a little bit deeper into flow.
Might get a little geeky. Is that all right?
I love your geekiness. It is so welcomed here. I also was going to say too, that I really appreciate, you are so tapped into the creative force, but you're also so tapped into science. And so I just love listening to you, because you are really looking at this so holistically.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like science is a way that we get to look at the miracle of life. And so for me, it's not that I need it for validation. It's just that it's so cool that it actually works like that, and that I can point to it and go, oh my gosh, that is so working. And so when we think about flow, right, it's a state of being that is experienced by human beings, usually when they're in a cycle of intense concentration or bliss, and you enter into a brain body somatic chemistry state where you have access to more thoughts, different kinds of energies. And from a movement building perspective, you can think of it as this force itself that feels a particular way, just like gravity feels a particular way. This feeling is like, if you have a call, you're in the middle of a sacred math equation. Something over here called the calling is pulling you, like almost sucking you forward. You're just like, oh, I don't know if I have a choice. You're just sort of animated by it. And then there's this other energy that's sort of at your back that's pushing. So it's like this push-pull. And when you're on and you're in flow, whether that's in a painting or a song or building a business or whatever it is, you're sort of in between those poles. You could think of them as a positive and a negative, or a proton and electron, or energy equals matter at the speed of light. And so I sort of think of myself as, like, we call it riding the equal sign, where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm right here. And you can really tell when you're in it and also when you're not in it. Because when you're not in it, it's hustle, it's drag, it's just making everything work. You're trying to orchestrate the miracle instead of being in the miracle. And I'm not saying it's always like that, but if you have enough moments that are like that, then you know what that feels like in your body, and you kind of surrender into it. And then my experience is that I'm carried in what we could think of as a supreme intelligence, which has way more access to the best ideas than I ever could. And so I think ultimately for the visionary and for the founder, it's really is about access to ideas. Like, consciousness is not just this, oh, I am conscious and aware. It's like, actually, I can think clearly now and therefore act on the logic of this idea as it's arising for me. Does this work? Is this what's appropriate? Is it meeting a need? Is it appropriate for Earth? Have I taken the historical context into consideration? Am I thinking about the future? Like, all these factors come in, and then you're sort of carried, sometimes pulled, sometimes yanked.
I loved how you described this calling and then this pushing at your back. I can really, really resonate with that at a deep level. Even from a young age, I felt this calling, like I had this karmic assignment that I was here to do something for a big reason. And every single thing in my life has been a breadcrumb to bring
Yeah.
me to that exact place.
Yeah.
And it has felt so divinely led, actually like scary to me at times.
Right.
Right. And I loved how you said it's almost like you don't have a choice because it feels that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it does because it's bigger than you.
It is.
You know,
Yeah.
there's that Teilhard de Chardin quote about having a sensual longing to be a part of something that's bigger than you are.
Hmm.
Sensual. You know, it is to be in the flow with a call is a sensuality to it. It's not a heady thing. It's an embodied practice, really.
Yeah, I just wrote a Substack on this around sacred leadership as the pathway to integration. Because as I step into Movement Maker, it literally is like taking everything that I've ever learned from the head of knowledge into the embodiment of wisdom. And it asks everything of you to step over the fire and just trust this calling. And then it brings up all of your ancestral patterning that you really haven't, you thought that you've looked at, but then you're like, oh shit, I haven't even begun to spiral into this. There's so much to unpack here with you, but the ancestral piece of your work and intentional creativity too. But maybe we'll get to that in a second. I just want to talk to you a bit more about that karmic assignment and how you have really stepped into your power of this big calling of yours.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to explain if someone hasn't had it, right? But it's signified by a sensation in the body and in the brain where it's bigger than you. It doesn't serve you as an individual necessarily. It's something that needs and wants to happen in the universe. And there may be a part of you that is geared toward it, but it could also have very little to do with you. Sometimes I feel like it has very little to do with me. My work, which is called intentional creativity, which is what we've done since the beginning of time, which is make what you make with love. I mean, that's just the most basic human, normal, logical thing. But the feeling around it is like an obsession.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my gosh, this could help everything overnight. Like it almost makes you naive in a weird way. Cause I'm like, intentional creativity. I mean, if we just started being intentional about this, we wouldn't make GMO food. We would stop driving cars. We would stop poisoning the planet. We'd have to be kind to each other. We wouldn't make things that break. We wouldn't make things that extract. I mean, this really is the consciousness, right? So you get kind of like in this thing where you're like, okay, this could actually help. Like if everyone just only did what was intentional creativity and beauty, like overnight the world would change. And so having something that's that big, and of course it doesn't work like that, but having something that's that big that also works, actually works when someone starts to be intentionally creative about their food and their clothing and their work, they stop harming and poisoning each other. So I feel the call, is for Earth. It is not just for me. And my part was this lifetime I was available. And I said yes. That was a negotiation, but I said yes. And so I feel like I'm still in it now. And every once in a while, I'm like, am I done yet? I think I did it. Like I have a feeling of having fulfilled on my sacred assignment, but I'm sort of in that liminality between what it was and where it's going. And I think that sacred assignments and callings that include more than just you, generally impact lots of other people. Not always, but a lot of times that's what would qualify as a movement, is that it's not just you're moving, but actually people want to move in that shape with you.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I'm building Movement Maker, I'm finding that there's a lot of education around, well, what is a movement? What's the difference between starting a business and what's a difference between starting a movement? And the things that I've found is, one, it's born from a calling that won't stop calling. And then, one is around profit and one is more around raising consciousness. And I think, something that I want to dive into a little deeper with you in this discussion a little later is I think you've also done a really wonderful job of getting to the crux of making profit and raising consciousness. I think, you're a wonderful example that artists don't have to be starving artists and can actually build movements experience that can be both profitable and can also raise consciousness. But the last thing that I think, is really movement oriented is you're not thinking about the bottom line and what you can sell. You're also thinking about legacy. And that's something that I love watching you constantly talk about. What is the movement going to be 100 years from now? And what kind of ancestor are you being, training for to be tomorrow? So you're really looking at this, so holistically, which I just really admire.
Yeah. Yeah, we call it the 500-year plan. And it's like, do I really think my soul identity is going to be at a meeting with some of these people in 500 years? And the answer is probably,
Mm-hmm.
because my sense at this point is that we had already agreed to do this. And so in my community, even though we're all different spiritual traditions, if I say to someone, did you hear my call? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, you also called me. And so we have a feeling, which is spiritual, but it's more than spiritual because it's so felt that like we were supposed to meet. And so one of Indigenous elders, when it was a really good gathering, her name's Carmen, she would say, maybe we agreed to meet here. And now I'm like, this was the agreed upon meeting. And if we act as if that is so, how different will we be? Mm-hmm. And that helps to move us into the moment. Like if this is the meeting we called a couple 100 years ago and our souls were like, hey, I'm going to come find you and I'm going to recognize you. And I would be like, hey, what are you doing? Come over here. If that is that meeting, how different will we be? Well, I think we'll be very different about our actions because we'll be much more intentional. And we take it all just very seriously, isn't the right word, but just like so intensely, like we just feel really intense about the call to gather and to do this sacred work. And so the thought of the long view, like in Indigenous traditions where they say, 7 generations, if someone starts to love at the level of 7 generations, which means probably maybe not your kids are going to benefit, you don't know who they are, you're not going to be praised for it, there's no outcome that you're going to get from it in terms of conscious soul this lifetime, maybe in some other dimension or incarnation. But if you can love someone like that, then your heart starts beating differently and your brain starts functioning differently. So that's part of our work that we develop with the sort of backdrop of painting as the somatic practice is to learn to love beyond your immediate needs and expectations for your own family and well-being. And I'll be very critical to say that I think it's the evolutionary issue that we're navigating, and probably what I think of as one of my failures so far is not being able to create that next evolutionary space in people where they're like, oh, yeah, I care about those people's kids hundreds of years from now. Like it's a feeling, you can't make it up. You have to sort of arrive at it, and it could be spiritual, but I actually think it's biological. I think it's a biological thing that we maybe used to have and we don't have it anymore. We sort of devolved and we just don't love big enough, and we don't care enough where we're like, wow, I really want this, not because I'm going to be a good person, but because that's what's right to love that big.
Right.
Right. Yep. So I'm working all the time to try to discover, because I do feel like that.
I do too.
So maybe that's a movement. As you do these interviews, you're going to find like these common qualities among modern movement leaders. Maybe this is one of them, right?
Well, no, I mean, Shiloh, this is literally the reason I started Movement Maker, because I see people like you and other movement maker friends of mine who have this lioness heart. I mean, it's too much to bear, actually, sometimes. It's insane. It's insane. And then embodiment, you keep bringing up, I feel everything, like so heavy so much of the time that I'm getting better at the somatic practices of like taking care of this vessel of mine to be able to hold all of this.
Right.
And this is the reason I wanted to bring people like you together, because I'm realizing we can't do this alone. It's too much to hold. Also, we have our individual beauties and knowledge and wisdom that we bring to be able to birth this new earth that needs to happen. And I think you're absolutely right that it is our job to help people think about the future generations and to open up their hearts again to the collective whole, especially in the Western framework that we're in, where we're just, nuclear family, individualized, and really bring it back to that ancient wisdom of tribalism and support and being in right relationship with the earth, ourselves, and our community. I want to pause for a quick moment. If what we're talking about today resonates with you, you'll want to check out the Movement Maker Incubator, my 6-month intensive where I guide sacred rebels and changemakers to birth their own movements using ancient wisdom and modern strategy. You can join the waitlist and learn more about this sacred rite of passage for changemakers at globalmovementmaker.com/incubator.
Well said.
Yeah.
And it's a unique thing. So you end up feeling isolated sometimes. Like I can really talk to really about this because it's not the same as a business or a community without a business. Like movements have both, right? Mm-hmm. And people have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yep.
So the only people I really can relate to on this point are people who have put their lives at stake for other people's children and for the earth. And, and sometimes, we're learning how to not sacrifice ourselves on that altar too, because it's hard because the need doesn't go anywhere. And the movement is not to fix or alleviate the need, actually. And then that will exhaust us. It's really like, how present can we actually be in whatever we're doing right now, no matter what shit show is going on around us, that we keep our eye on that. We reach for the people who are running from the burning building, who are reaching for us, but we still are like, I have this thing I'm doing and it's helping, but it's just enough for today. And that's enough. That's it. And it can be really distracting to think we're going to actually fix something. I feel like the activism and feminism and movements of the past felt like, wow, once everybody's aware of this information, they're just going to stop acting like that. Oh, but that's not what happened, right? So we actually now are sort of aware of all of the shenanigans and we didn't actually change it or prevent it. So now I feel like one of the stamina points for the movement founders is to proceed parallel to that without that canceling, but neither without like focusing our attention over there, which is a distraction of life force. And that is a nervous system balance situation, y'all. I mean, that is not for everyone,
Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm. I saw one of your posts on Facebook the other day where you were really, really vulnerable and had someone, I think several people in your community or, even outside of your community, I don't know the specifics, but have wanted you to speak out and, you've really beautifully held your ground and been in your own truth and also talked about the self-care of your own being through this really difficult time. It's so hard to be everything to everyone. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, like rooting in your truth, especially during these divisive times and also running a community and what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, first to say it is one of the reasons why someone would not end up doing this because of what this particular thing feels like. Doesn't feel worth it a lot of days.
Yep.
I feel like there's what I would call a both and consciousness that emerges that is not about like an elevated consciousness, but it's like a fulling out of a kind of a being in the world where you're like, wow, I really get why that person's doing that. Oh, I really get why they're doing that. And here's this other place right in the middle. But both sides are like, there is no middle. And you're like, well, actually, I'm standing in the middle, right? So, and to do that authentically, not with posturing to either side. So when I woke up this morning, the exact phrase in my head was, in between the lesser of two evils, there is a truth, but no one wants to look at her. That place where, and the polarization of consciousness wants it to be just one way and then makes it a morality play when it's not. And it's sometimes challenging to stand in either place when I authentically could see both and I authentically just agree with both, but that doesn't mean I need to, I don't need anyone to agree with me, right? But it's like, actually, this is a place and the middle is not neutral. I mean, that's the thing. It is not mediocre. You're actually holding a view. And then there's a point where you're like, actually, that is dead wrong. And I do not support that. But there's
Right.
so many things that are not actually like that, that
Mm-hmm.
bear a need for a deeper kinds of consciousness. And what I mostly see, and this will piss people off, is like, there's a part of the brain and heart that hasn't come on yet, which doesn't allow for that to be the case, where
Mm-hmm.
someone could actually authentically hold both and be like, oh, okay. I mean, there's a part of us that is not fired and wired that way. And then all the systems are set up to create a divide and conquer kind of a brain, an either or brain. And it
Yep.
just, there's so little ground that's shared there. And so, yeah, that part has been, it's not the hardest part, but that definitely, because somehow, like, if you got 5 people following you, you got a platform or something, and you're supposed to like now be an expert. You, of all people, should be talking about X, Y, Z, and you should be doing this, and you should be doing that. And I'm just like, what? I mean, like, who gets to define that? And yet I'm like, well, could I help? But gosh, it's a landmine of problems. And then there's this whole collapse thing, which any of you who are movement founders will feel or have felt, which is that people collapse what the leader or the founder is like, as if my worldview is the truth of the community. And as often as I say, no, I actually am myself. And then I have a thing I've set up for my community, which creates all this possibility. And they're like, no, actually, you're the personality. And there's no way for the community not to be biased. I'm like, I know it's no way for them not to be biased, because if they love me in their community, they are interested in what I have to say. But that part sucks. Like, that part just, I should be able to have, I do not present myself as an example. I don't want to be a freaking example. I want to be free. I want to be myself. I'm a creative. I want to do whatever the heck I want. And then I want to serve with my gifts and be able to turn that off and come over and be whoever I want to be. But people don't want you to do that. They want you to be exemplary. You have to have your finances in order and never be divorced and never say anything bad. And every post has to be perfect, which, guess what, makes people not want to be leaders, because it's worse than boring. Boring is like the worst thing, but it's like, it's impossible. You can't actually do that. And then you risk, a social attack. So
We could talk for hours just on this topic. I feel that so deeply. And especially it's really interesting as I identify as a highly sensitive person, HSP. And so you put on top of that, like HSP and the sheer fear of like that much conflict and that much like emotion to hold and also responsibility to hold. And then you also, of course, put onto that being a woman and being told your entire life to disappear and smile and make nice. And so this is really systemic rewiring that, as I said before, that pathway to integration, when you're building a movement, you are having to walk right through that. And that is severely uncomfortable and a lot to hold, and exactly why a lot of females and HSPs don't step into movement making, which that's really part of my beck and call, as I'm trying to call in those HSP and females to step up, because we need their leadership right now.
that's for sure. And it's requiring new neurocircuitry, and that's would be one of the reasons why I paint. I build stamina. I rewire my brain and my heart. And so it's not a mental construct. Like, I'm literally here working it out and then developing like a psychic spiritual muscle, which allows me to navigate. And so I think that having a personal practice or discipline is just so essential for those of us who are willing to stand in that space where people are looking to you. You don't really want to be the person they're looking to. You're pointing toward, hey, there's this thing we're working on together. I'm not asking you to be me or do what I'm doing. I'm asking us to look at this thing. But there's a collapse of the personality brand inside of, which is just such a bummer. It's like we don't have the right wiring. I don't know how else to say it. Like, we just can't think intelligently enough about how this works. It would be so much better if we could have like a special class of thinking about people who are willing to make movements and be
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. That's where
You're
the
doing it.
movement maker incubator comes in. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. But, I want to hit on a couple other points that you were talking about. One, I want to talk about that holding complexity. And then I also want to talk about the cult of personality with movement making, because it's both of those are so ripe. So one is that complexity. You were saying the out with that field, I'll find you between right and wrong. That, yeah, I just butchered that quote. But anyways, and are you familiar with spiral dynamics?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so what you're talking about is spiral dynamics, where literally it's just going, up towards a greater level of understanding past the green and into the teal, where we're able to actually hold that complexity, because the reptilian brain is wired for safety. And this is why people are standing in their truths and standing in absolute truths, because they're trying to find safety in a very uncertain and unsafe world. But where you're coming from and why you've really stepped into leadership is because you can hold that complexity at a greater level. And just by you being able to hold that resonates for other people to start, you're being the lighthouse for people to start questioning if they can hold larger truths, which is incredible and a lot really hard work.
And asking themselves, what is it about that idea or that belief or that stand that I'm hooked into?
Exactly.
What's over there, right? Mm-hmm. Because we've been in fight or flight, for the past 10,000 years with some small gaps. If you have privilege, we don't know when it's operating and when it's not operating. So we're sort of hijacked and getting even more hijacked from that perspective. And so the kind of thinking that's needed is nuanced. And that is, you can't use blunt force with nuance, right? So it's, I think that's the power of the movement that becomes possible, is that people come up and out together and get to other places in a collective state. But then we also see how many cults arise out of that same rising to the top of a certain kind of consciousness. You're like, okay, we're there. And then, but actually now you have to do these things in order to maintain it. Oh my God, this is hard.
It's never ending. It's never ending. Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about the cult of personality. See that something that makes a movement as well is that it doesn't belong to you.
Right.
And you continuously have said that have all of these artists from all around the world, but all of you are building intentional creativity movement. And so to our listeners, any best words of advice around that cult of personality as you step into leadership, and how can you really give power to your people so it's a shared communion of this calling with one another?
I think that it has to be a little bit of both at this point. You have to have dynamic enough leaders that people want to gather with them. That's real. And then you also have to have that person be evolved enough to want to share power. Mm-hmm. And those two don't go together very often, as we see. And people just don't know how to manage the power and attention or even fame. Once they start getting a little bit of it, they don't actually, they're not wired to be like, let me share this with you. And then let me show you how to be someone that people want to be with. And here's ways you can do that. Because sometimes for a charismatic leader, it's an innate thing for them. It's just, you are who you are, and people want to be around someone who is who they are. I mean, that's the most charismatic thing of all, is someone being themselves. And so if you're surrounded by a whole bunch of people, but they haven't been themselves yet, then people aren't going to want to be with them. And so I think part of the acts of selflessness that the charismatic leader does, if they're willing, is to actually teach the dynamic power of holding space to other people as a thing that they could learn to do. And in our case, driven by a practice. So we have hundreds of people who can teach what I'm teaching, and it doesn't end up being about me. Right. And it doesn't end up being about the person who's teaching it either. But I think we really have to have both. Like, I started with a little bit of personality brand and then went away from it for maybe 15 years. And now people are like, yeah, but they're still just coming for you, but you're acting like they're not. I'm like, I don't think they're just coming for me. I think they're coming for everybody. And it's like, well, me and the community. So I'm still the draw. But then when people get in, then they're like, oh yeah, I love all these people. I love all these people. And then they're less fixated on me. And then I've done a good job.
Yeah.
We do a lot of training people to do the work. We do a lot of space holding. We do a lot of me seeing their gifts and like, would you go ahead and teach this? I want you to teach this. You're really good at this. Okay, let's have you do it. And then we do a lot of I share power with them until, people see their face with mine. They're like, okay, Shiloh, trust them. I think I'll trust them. But that part is like the completely unpaid labor of the movement founder to elevate. You could never pay me enough to do what I've actually done, to have other people's faces and voices be something people wanted to come to, right? Like that's just right there. And that's not easy. And that also, I think, has been one of the harder parts too, from a finance perspective, is that if you're the reason people are coming and investing, and if income is tied to that personality, and then you're trying to distribute that movement founder is just not the only place the income is coming in, like, whoa, okay.
Yep.
It's like a math equation right there.
Every episode of the Call to Rise podcast is about the changemakers and movements reshaping our world. But the podcast is just the beginning. On my Substack, I open the door wider, sharing my personal journey with movement makers, the wins, the struggles, and the behind-the-scenes rituals that help leaders birth what's next. If you're ready to go deeper into the frameworks and practices you hear me hint at here, join me at globalmovementmaker.substack.com. Wow. Yeah. And can you talk, I'm glad that you brought that up around the finances and like how you build your movement, because you really have created a different way of doing business and movement making. Do you want to share some of your lessons or some of your vision there? Because while it has, I'm hearing that it has been challenging in some places, but you've also really done some amazing work in that area too.
Let me just think of what's the most helpful. Money, when you don't have something to start with, is based on ideas. And so a leader's capacity to think of an idea that creates a solution that actually has revenue connected to it, that's about clarity of thought. And unfortunately, in this late stage of extractive capitalism, the majority of the ways that money gets made are either high ticket or high volume. And there are some other equations, but those are the ones that don't include making of stuff. So those are intellect, high ticket, high volume. And then the leader finds themselves sort of caught in between, oh, wow, if I do this membership thing, and then how many people do I need in order to just pay, keep the lights on, right? Or, I'm like $25,000 for a coaching, and that brings it down to 2 people can do it, right? And the numbers have a challenging way to find each other in a cadence that allows you to have a staff and a building and stuff like that. So I think that the keeping our eye on the new ways that income can come in, but that's not extractive, right? So I have never, and this is probably where I made some of my mistakes too, is I have never taken money out of the company. So instead of investing in something that I could sell later, and then reinvest that profit in the company, I just kept sewing back into people and projects. And 30 years later, I'm still here and I'm still doing it and I'm still profitable and people are still working here. And we have, 95% women staff and people all over the world and all different ages and all that stuff. But it's like, I didn't save enough out for myself because I just kept putting it back in. But even today, I was like, there's almost nothing I believe in that I'm willing to put money in that's going to multiply enough to make a difference right now. So it's complex because I think I've done the right thing, sewing back in. And it also means I have to keep going, which is like the trap of the entrepreneur movement founder is like, then it's just largely based on you reproducing yourself and your ideas in such a way that revenue keeps coming, which puts you into a marketing trap. And it is, right? So I think that's the challenging part. If you're not going to do like fundraising, which my friends who do fundraising, they're working just as hard as I am, doing it from an entrepreneurial perspective. But I think there's lots of other ways that are coming up that are other ways of working with income, but I just don't want to invest in anything I don't ultimately believe in. And I don't believe in most of the financial currencies that are available today. Like I don't believe in them at all.
Yep. Yeah, we certainly do find ourselves in a conundrum. And speaking of that kind of in between place right now.
Yeah.
Right. So it feels like fertile ground to be dreaming of what could be, but we're in that liminal space that we can't really see the next frontier. And so I guess in these times, it's, at least for me, I find getting more quiet, listening more, and then connecting with movement makers like yourself and trying to dream up the next iteration. Because yeah, I agree. This isn't working.
Right. Well, let me share one thing for those who are listening about how I work that does work. And it has to do with an approach to manifesting.
Love it.
In most of the teachings on manifestation, including the Joe Dispenzas and law of attractions and back to the secrets and stuff, one of the primary ideas is to project into the quantum what you want as a seed sort of out there in the future. And then you generate that chemistry, which in a spiritual quantum way eventually starts to collapse the distance between you and that, because you feel the feeling and then you have the thought and then you can do the thing, or the people come and they recognize you, right? So there's this whole quantum thing that gets stirred up that is about collapsing the distance between you and the thing that you're creating. So it only sometimes works. And if it worked a lot more people who are good people would be way wealthier by now, as much time as they've put into that concept. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm just really I'm really challenging those ideas, and I haven't. I'm very verbal about challenging those ideas, because something isn't working because you have to think a particular way, you have to be privileged enough to have the time, you have to, and so the way that we teach it here and the way that I do everything is to be able to keep your eye on the reality of where things actually are in your bank account, in your finances, in your staff. And you're just kind of like, hey, that is where it is. And it's okay for me to be honest with myself about what that looks like. Let me look at that balance. Let me look at that invoice. Oh, that thing didn't work over there. And you hold that and you do not let it take you out. People are really weird about looking at that. They think it's because it's hard over there. They think that's negativity. Well, I'm like, no, that's just a balance sheet over there.
That is reality. Yeah.
It's okay to feel. And if you don't and you bypass it, this isn't ultimately going to work. Only sometimes there's a quickening. And I've had plenty of times where I wasn't doing this and I was able to call that in. But every time I was like, that is not sustainable. I call that yanking on the universe, right?
Yeah.
Our teaching is look at where you are, be in an honest assessment. Like if you want to create and this includes if you want to create a 6-figure, membership model in a year, you're going to need, $8,333, right? In order for that to happen every month. And if it's $1 million, it's 83,333.333. And then you take that number and then you divide backwards based on the number of people relative to the amount of the thing. And if you're not actually doing that, and you come to me for coaching and I'm like, you don't even know how many people at what price point is going to get to your thing. And then you're complaining about the fact that the thing isn't happening. So just being willing to look at what does it actually take to create even $1,000 out of an idea, right? Let alone $1 million. And then over here, you seed into that dream possibility without negating this. So there's what there is, which is
there's reality and dreaming.
And this is what's coming. And then the real life force comes from the vision and the reality, because you're then grounded in now and you're like, I got to do that, but I am this person dreaming over here. Therefore, my right next to action right here in this moment is this one thing. And it's one thing. People want to do 20 things here. It's like, no, just one thing. And then the next thing will bring you to the next thing. But that state of just consciousness of this and this puts you into a state of chemistry, which allows you to harness ideas that you cannot harness when you're over there or over there. So if we're talking about flow state, we're talking about intentional chemistry that actually works again and again, looks at what is, looks at what's possible, and stands in the now.
Thank you so much for saying that. I think that what you said was just so rich, especially for soulpreneurs that I'm going to be working with and, movement makers looking to do spiritual movements like that. Oftentimes we can get too much in the spiritual woo and not so much in the groundedness of right here and now. And that's really important. And I found myself within what you were talking about, because my thing is when you're a visionary and when you're a creator, there's a million different ideas. It can be overwhelming how much information is coming through. And then I'm guilty of this. I can go a million different directions, a million different hours of the day. And so that was a really, really great reminder to just take one step at a time. You don't have to build the whole empire in one sitting, which I try to do, and, one step at a time. So thank you for reminding us of that.
Because we short circuit ourselves.
Exactly.
Because we don't know how to hold that big vision in the now and take that one right next step, because the most powerful step is usually like the third or fourth one. But from an intuition perspective, if you don't do those, I don't know, I'm just supposed to call this person. And then I talked to that person. See, I don't know what that was about, but now I'm standing here. What am I looking at? What am I looking at? Like by the fourth thing that you've said yes to, that's the step that doesn't seem like the big step, then this horizon opens. You can't get to it because you haven't built up the trust. And that's a neural pathway and a quantum thing where, if you receive an instruction, call this person, take this action, buy this URL, do this drawing, reach out, blah, 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 whatever. If you don't actually do that because you're like, yeah, but I'm making $1 million over here, I don't want to talk to that person or whatever, then you do not establish a neural pathway of trust that allows for that part of you which holds those ideas to give it to you because you haven't actually built it.
Yeah.
So when you start building it by saying yes, right next step, oh, I just did it, I did it again. And then the thing comes through, then you're like, oh, okay. So the real thing I'm looking for is like 4 layers deep after 3 yeses that I had no idea what they were about.
Yep.
That's a big thing, everybody. I can't tell you how big that is. People don't understand because they just want to do the big thing. Mm-hmm. And it just, sometimes you can do that, but that's also exhausting. The right next step is just not exhausting usually.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that in. All right. Well, we're going to be closing it out. I could talk to you for absolutely forever. I want people to know where they can find you, a little bit more about intentional creativity, how they can find your community. So invite them in.
Yeah. Well, our community is ideal for creatives and healers and guides. And we have a foundation called the Intentional Creativity Foundation. That's our not-for-profit, and that is our membership. It's a virtual and physical museum. And then we also have education. And so you can find everything at MUSEA.org. That's Muse with an A, MUSEA.org. That's the community. And then I'm Shiloh Sophia. So ShilohSophiaGallery.com is my artwork. Yeah, so that's how, and it's very much about the person who just wants to be in conscious creative community, regardless of whatever their art form is. But generally, if someone's not creating, we won't be as fascinating to them. We're best for people who really making pottery, making jewelry, making love, making art, because it is our mother's tongue, is creation. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. We're like, well, let me see your painting, right? Like, well, what did you work on? And what's going on for you in there? And even our coaching is based on that. So, but please feel free to come check us out if you're a creative or you feel called or you just want to see what that's like. We have our own app and all kinds of fun things.
Yay, amazing. I've been lucky enough to come to a couple of Shiloh's beautiful ceremonies that she does, and then art workshops and beautiful MUSEA. And she really does just curate such an incredibly beautiful museum and artwork and community that is just so nourishing. So if you want to get your hands dirty in some paint or some clay, then definitely jump into Shiloh's world. Thank you for listening to The Call to Rise. If today's conversation stirred something in you, subscribe and share it with a fellow movement maker. And join our community at globalmovementmaker.com. Till next time, keep leading with courage, keep weaving ancient wisdom with modern strategy, and always remember to answer the call.